The morning mist clung to the valley like a shroud, but nothing could have prepared Elias for what tore through the sky above his modest cabin. The rift opened with a sound like reality itself being unzipped, a deep, resonant hum that made his bones vibrate. 20 years of peaceful solitude shattered as the glowing vessel descended, its hull gleaming with symbols he recognized from half-remembered dreams. Elias dropped his coffee mug, ceramic fragments scattering across the wooden porch as he watched the impossible unfold. The ship touched down with surprising gentleness, its landing thrusters barely disturbing the wildflowers that surrounded his property. Steam hissed from cooling engines as a seamless door materialized in the craft's side. She emerged like a vision from another world, because she was. Kayla had grown into something magnificent and terrifying. Her frame was tall and lean, muscles defined by years of warfare rippling beneath skin that shimmered with an inner light. The ceremonial armor she wore was a masterwork of alien metallurgy, flowing curves that seemed to move with her breathing, protecting vital areas while allowing for fluid movement. Her face retained the delicate features he remembered, but her eyes, those same golden eyes that had looked at him with such trust, now held the weight of command and the fire of a survivor. "Hello, Elias," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of vocal cords adapted for both human and Varelian communication. "I told you I would never forget." The words hit him like a physical blow. 20 years collapsed into nothing as memories flooded back. A terrified child clinging to his uniform, the smoking ruins of her village, the desperate weeks they'd spent hiding in the crystal caves while he taught her basic survival skills. He remembered her tears when his rescue ship finally arrived and his promise to return. A promise he'd broken. "Kayla?" His voice cracked like a teenager's. "My God, what have you become?" She stepped closer, and he could see the intricate tattoos that covered her arms, not decorative marks but ritual scars that told the story of her rise to power. Each symbol represented a victory, a treaty, a moment when the scattered Varelian tribes chose to follow her instead of surrendering to extinction. "I became what you taught me to be," she replied, her head tilting in that familiar gesture he remembered. A survivor, a protector, a leader who never abandons those who depend on her. The implied rebuke stung, but Elias couldn't argue with it. When the Solmars War had erupted, dragging humanity into 3 years of vicious civil conflict, returning to help one alien child had seemed impossible. By the time peace was restored, he'd convinced himself that she was probably dead, that the rescue efforts would have found any survivors. He'd been wrong. "I heard about the war on Earth," Kyla continued, her expression softening slightly. "I know why you couldn't return, but I need you to understand what your kindness accomplished." She gestured and holographic images materialized in the air between them. Elias watched in amazement as the story unfolded. Kayla as a teenager, using the improvised weapons training he'd given her to defend other survivors. Kayla as a young adult, translating his lessons about human military tactics to unite fractured tribes. Kayla as a commander, leading the Varelian rebirth against the crystalline entities that had nearly wiped out her species. "Your people call it the human-first yes principle," she said with a slight smile. "The idea that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change the course of civilizations. You saved more than just me, Elias, you saved my entire species." But the warmth in her expression faded as quickly as it had appeared. "Now I need you to do it again." Part 2. The threat revealed. The holographic display shifted, showing star charts that made Elias's blood run cold. Fleet formations, supply lines, troop manifests, all bearing the insignia of the Terran Colonial Expansion Initiative. His stomach dropped as he recognized the tactical patterns, the same methodical approach that had been used to pacify dozens of worlds across the Outer Rim. "The Meridian Fleet," he whispered, reading the designation on the lead dreadnought. "Captain Voss Brennan commanding." Kayla's golden eyes sharpened. "You know this human?" "We served together during the Titan Rebellion," Elias said, sinking into one of his porch chairs as the weight of realization hit him. Voss is thorough. If the colonial initiative has marked your world for settlement, he won't deviate from protocol. First contact, resource assessment, population relocation or elimination if the natives prove incompatible with colonial objectives. The Varelian warrior's expression hardened. My people have been through enough wars. We cannot endure another purge. Elias studied the fleet composition with a professional eye he'd thought long dormant. 3 heavy cruisers, a dozen frigates, transport ships loaded with prefabricated colony modules and enough firepower to level continents. Standard colonial pacification force, designed to overwhelm any resistance through superior technology, and coordinated strikes. They don't know about the rebirth, he realized. Their intelligence is 20 years out of date. They're expecting to find scattered primitive tribes, not a unified civilization. A mistake that will cost lives on both sides, Kayla agreed grimly. My people have learned much about warfare in the past 2 decades. We've reverse-engineered captured technology, developed new weapons, trained an entire generation of warriors who have never known defeat. If your Captain Brennan attempts a standard colonial assault, it will become a bloodbath. She manipulated the hologram, showing him defensive positions carved into the crystal mountains, underground cities that could withstand orbital bombardment, and weapons platforms that would make even a heavy cruiser think twice. The scattered refugees he'd left behind had transformed into something formidable. But even if we win, she continued, the cost will be enormous, and victory against one fleet will only invite a larger response. I've studied human colonial policy, Elias. You don't accept defeat gracefully. That was unfortunately accurate. The Terran colonial initiative had built its reputation on the principle that setbacks were temporary, resistance was futile, and every world would eventually fly human flags. A defeated colonial fleet would be followed by a war fleet, then an entire battle group if necessary. Why come to me? Elias asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. I'm just a retired scout captain living in the middle of nowhere. Kayla's smile held no humor. Because you're the only human who understands both sides of this conflict. You know Brennan's tactics, and you understand what my people have become. More importantly, you're the only human my warriors will trust. She gestured again, and the hologram showed a different scene. Varelian council chambers where beings that looked barely old enough to remember childhood sat in positions of authority. But when one of them spoke, Elias recognized the voice, despite the electronic translation. That's Jexhai, he breathed. The little one who used to hide behind your legs. Now War Marshal Jexhai, commander of our Eastern Legions, Kayla confirmed. Every leader in my government is someone you helped save. They remember the human who showed them kindness when the world was ending. They'll follow me into battle, but they'll only consider peace if you're the one asking for it. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden. 20 years ago, he'd saved a handful of children by teaching them to fight and survive. Now those children commanded armies, and the lessons he'd taught them might be the only thing standing between 2 civilizations and a war that neither could truly win. You want me to broker a peace, he said. I want you to prevent a massacre, she corrected. Because whether we win or lose against Brennan's fleet, the real enemy is coming behind them. The same crystalline entities that nearly destroyed us before have been spreading across this sector. Earth's expansion is driving them toward inhabited systems, including yours. If we can't find a way to work together, both our species will face extinction. The hologram flickered and died, leaving them in the morning sunlight that seemed pale after the vivid colors of the display. How long do we have? Brennan's fleet will reach Varelian space in 72 hours, Kayla replied. After that, talking becomes much more difficult. Into the void, the interior of Kayla's ship was a marvel of adaptive engineering, combining Varelian crystal tech with salvaged human components in ways that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. As they accelerated toward the jump point, Elias found himself studying the crew with fascination and growing concern. They were all young, barely into their 20s by human standards, though Varelian aging was different enough that he couldn't be certain. What struck him most was their casual competence. These weren't desperate refugees learning to fight. They were professional warriors who'd never known anything but conflict. Navigator Zeftara, adjust our trajectory by 0.7 degrees, called out the ship's second-in-command, a lean Varelian whose ritual scars covered half his face. We want to arrive at optimal intercept coordinates. Acknowledged War Second Kithron, came the reply from a being whose hands moved across crystalline control surfaces with practiced ease. Elias recognized the tactical thinking behind their approach vector. They weren't just traveling to meet Brennan's fleet. They were positioning themselves to control the engagement if diplomacy failed. These weren't the frightened survivors he'd left behind. They were apex predators who'd learned to hunt in packs. "Tell me about Captain Brennan," Kayla said, settling into the commander's chair beside him. "What kind of human is he?" It was a complex question. Elias stared at the star field visible through the main viewport as he gathered his thoughts. Voss is dedicated. He believes in human expansion not because he enjoys conquest, but because he genuinely thinks it's best for everyone involved. In his mind, human civilization represents order, progress, and stability. He's not cruel, but he's absolutely ruthless when he thinks he's protecting that vision. "A zealot," Kithran observed from his position at the tactical station. "No," Elias corrected. "A zealot acts on faith. Voss acts on evidence, or what he believes is evidence. He's seen too many worlds tear themselves apart when left to their own devices. The Colonial Initiative's standard protocols exist because they work more often than they fail." Kayla absorbed this information with the same intensity she'd once focused on his survival lessons. What would convince him to change course? "Proof that your people represent stability rather than chaos," Elias said immediately, "and evidence that cooperation serves human interests better than conquest." But Kayla, his intelligence reports are 20 years old. He's expecting to find the same broken civilization I left behind. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Emergence. From jump space in 30 seconds. All hands to stations." Through the viewport, the familiar distortion of a hyperspace exit began to manifest. Stars streaked and twisted as reality reasserted itself around them. When the process completed, they were in deep space between star systems, and they weren't alone. "Contact," Navigator Zeftara announced calmly. "Human fleet bearing 27 Mark IV, distance approximately 100,000 kilometers. Configuration matches intelligence reports." The main display activated, showing them a sight that made Elias's chest tighten with recognition. The Meridian hung in space like a predatory insect, her hull scarred from a dozen campaigns but her weapons arrays gleaming with recent maintenance. Around her, the escort vessels maintained perfect formation, close enough for mutual support, far enough apart to avoid presenting a concentrated target. "They're in standard approach formation," he observed, "still following colonial protocols. That's actually encouraging." "Why?" Kayla asked. "Because if Voss had decided your people were an immediate threat, he'd have deployed for combat. This formation is designed for first contact scenarios." He's still willing to talk. As if summoned by their conversation, the communications officer, a young Varelian whose translator collar bore the insignia of a senior rating, looked up from her station. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet, audio and visual, directed at us specifically." "Put it through," Kayla ordered. The main display shifted, showing the bridge of the Meridian. Captain Voss Brennan hadn't changed much in 20 years. Still, the same iron-gray hair, still the same calculating eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. But there were new lines around those eyes, and his uniform bore the ribbons of campaigns Elias didn't recognize. "Unknown vessel." Brennan's voice carried clearly across the void. "This is Captain Voss Brennan of the Terran colonial ship Meridian. You are operating in a designated colonial zone. Identify yourself and state your intentions." Kayla looked at Elias, who nodded encouragingly. She stood, her ceremonial armor catching the bridge lights in a way that emphasized both her authority and her alien nature. "Captain Brennan," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "I am Kayla, war leader of the Varelian Rebirth. I carry with me someone you knew long ago, Someone who believes it's time for our species to meet properly. She stepped aside and Elias moved into the transmission field. For a moment, recognition and shock warred across Brennan's features. "Elias Thorne," the captain said finally. "You disappeared 20 years ago. Intelligence marked you as KIA during the Sol-Mars conflict." "I survived," Elias replied simply. "And I found something worth protecting. Voss, we need to talk. Both. Our species are facing a threat that makes our territorial disputes look trivial. But first, we need to prevent a war that neither of us can afford to fight." The Council of Necessity. The neutral meeting point was a marvel of diplomatic improvisation. 2 ships linked by an extendable docking tube, their artificial gravity, fields carefully synchronized to avoid disorienting either species. Captain Brennan had agreed to the face-to-face meeting, but his escort ships maintained combat readiness, just as Kayla's hidden fleet remained on high alert in the system's asteroid belt. The conference room aboard the Meridian had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate Varelian physiology. Elias watched Brennan's tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Petra Voss, the captain's daughter, he realized with surprise, discreetly catalog every detail of their alien guests. Her eyes lingered on Kayla's ceremonial armor, no doubt analyzing its technological implications. "Before we begin," Brennan said, settling into his chair with military precision, "I need to understand the current political situation. Our last intelligence reports indicated scattered tribal groups with minimal technology. What I'm seeing suggests a unified government with significant military capabilities." Kayla activated a portable holographic projector, filling the room with 3-dimensional maps of Varelian space. 20 years ago, my people were dying, fractured, hunted on the edge of extinction. Today, we control 17 star systems and maintain defensive alliances with 6 other species. We've built cities that house millions, developed technologies that your scientists would find fascinating, and created a civilization based on the principles one human taught us. She gestured, and the display zoomed in on the Varelian homeworld. Where Elias remembered ruins and hiding places, magnificent crystal spires now reached toward the sky. Orbital platforms sparkled like jewels around the planet, and the asteroid belt showed signs of extensive mining operations. "Impressive," admitted Commander Marcus Delacroix, Brennan's chief diplomat. "But this raises difficult questions about colonial rights. The Terran Initiative has invested substantial resources in surveying and claiming this sector. Claims based on outdated information," Kayla replied smoothly. "Under Terran colonial law, inhabited systems with established governments cannot be claimed for settlement without formal treaties. We are no longer a collection of primitive tribes. We are a spacefaring civilization with legitimate territorial claims." Brennan's expression remained neutral, but Elias could see the calculations behind his eyes. A colonial action against scattered tribes was one thing. An invasion of an established multi-system government was something else entirely. That would require formal declaration of war, Senate approval, and resources the colonial initiative couldn't spare. "Assuming we accept your territorial claims," Brennan said carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" This was the moment Elias had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. He stood, drawing attention from both sides of the table. "What I'm proposing," he said, "is that we stop focusing on who owns what and start worrying about whether any of us will survive the next decade." He activated his own data pad, and the holographic display shifted to show long-range sensor readings that made everyone in the room lean forward. The images showed vast structures moving through space, not ships in any conventional sense, but living geometric forms that seemed to bend light around themselves. "The harvesters," Kayla said quietly. "What humans call the crystalline entities. They're not just a threat to one system or one species. They're a force of nature that devours everything in their path." Lieutenant Commander Voss spoke for the first time. "Intelligence reports suggested they were contained to the outer rim sectors." "Intelligence was wrong," Elias replied bluntly. "They're not contained. They're expanding. And they're using human colonial expansion as a guide. Every world you've claimed, every system you've surveyed, you've been mapping their dinner table for them." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Commander Delacroix was the first to break it. You're suggesting that our colonial expansion is actually helping them? I'm stating it as fact, Kayla confirmed. We've been monitoring their movement patterns for years. They follow human exploration routes using your survey data to identify inhabited systems. They're not just random predators, they're strategic hunters using your own intelligence against you. Brennan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he processed this information. And you believe cooperation between our species is the solution? I believe it's our only chance, Elias said. The Varelians have been fighting these things for 2 decades. They've developed weapons and tactics that work, but they can't cover enough territory to protect both their space and yours. Meanwhile, humanity has the industrial capacity and fleet strength to mount a real defense. But you're fighting blind because you don't understand what you're facing. Kayla stood, her presence filling the room with quiet authority. 20 years ago, a human showed my people kindness when we had nothing to offer in return. That kindness grew into respect, then alliance, then genuine friendship among the species we've encountered. Today, I'm offering the same gift to humanity. Partnership, based on mutual benefit rather than conquest. She paused, meeting each human's gaze in turn. But make no mistake, if you choose war with us, you'll get one. My people have learned from the best teacher in the galaxy, necessity. We will defend ourselves with everything we have, and what we have will surprise you. The question is whether you want allies in the coming storm, or whether you want to face the harvesters with enemies at your back. The choice, Elias realized, would determine the fate of both civilizations. Part 5. The Promise. Kept 6 months later, Elias stood on the observation deck of the Joint Command Station orbiting Kepler 442b, watching the most unprecedented sight in human history. Terran and Varelian vessels moved in coordinated formations. Their different technologies complement each other in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. The crystalline entity's latest assault had been repelled not through superior firepower, but through tactical innovation born of genuine cooperation. The integration is proceeding faster than anyone predicted, reported Dr. Nico Peterson, the lead xenotechnologist from the Meridian. Varelian crystal matrix computing systems are increasing our targeting efficiency by 40%, while our shield harmonics are providing them with protection they never thought possible. Behind them, War Marshal Jex High, the child who had once hidden behind Kayla's legs, was deep in conversation with Lieutenant Commander Petra Voss about planetary defense strategies. Their discussion was animated, filled with the kind of professional respect that developed between warriors who had fought side by side. It's remarkable, Commander Delacroix observed, joining Elias at the viewport. 6 months ago, we were prepared to fight them for colonial rights. Now we're training together against an enemy that makes our previous conflicts seem almost quaint. The Joint Fleet had won 3 major engagements against the Harvesters, each victory built on lessons learned from the last. Human industrial capacity provided the materials and ship hulls, while Varelian adaptive technology allowed rapid field modifications to counter new Harvester tactics. More importantly, the cultural exchange was proving as valuable as the military cooperation. Incoming priority transmission, announced the communications officer, a young Varelian who wore both species insignia with evident pride. Source is the Advanced Scout Network. The main display activated, showing Captain Brennan's weathered face. His expression was grim but determined, the look of a man who had found purpose in an impossible situation. Command Station Alpha. This is Brennan, aboard the reconnaissance vessel Horizon. We've identified a harvester staging area in the Vega system. Looks like they're preparing for a major push toward the inner colonies. Estimated enemy strength is significant, but the formation suggests they haven't adapted to our new joint tactics yet. Kayla materialized beside Elias, her presence as commanding as ever despite the casual ship's uniform she now wore. The ceremonial armor had been retired in favor of practical gear that could interface with both human and Varelian systems. Tactical assessment? She asked. They're using standard consumption patterns, Brennan replied. Systematic resource extraction followed by geometric expansion. but they're still treating human and Varelian space as separate territories. If we coordinate our response properly, we can use that blind spot against them. The next hour was spent in rapid planning, with officers from both species contributing expertise that individually would have been insufficient, but together formed a comprehensive strategy. Elias found himself in the familiar role of translator, not of languages, which the universal communicators handled adequately, but of concepts and cultural assumptions that could make or break an alliance. The Varelian concept of flow-state warfare isn't just about adapting to enemy tactics, he explained to a group of human tactical officers. It's about becoming part of the battle environment itself. Think of it as the difference between imposing your will on chaos and learning to dance with it. Similarly, he helped Varelian commanders understand human military doctrine. When humans talk about acceptable losses, they're not being callous. They're acknowledging that sometimes preserving the mission means accepting casualties, but they never stop trying to minimize them. It's pragmatism paired with conscience. As the Joint Task Force prepared to depart for the Vega system, Elias found himself alone with Kayla in the command station's arboretum, a space that brilliantly combined human hydroponics with Varelian crystal growth techniques. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Leaving your quiet retirement to get involved in another war?" Elias considered the question while studying a flowering vine that shouldn't have been able to exist, a hybrid of human and alien botanical techniques that created something entirely new. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "But I don't regret coming back. 20 years ago, I made a promise to a frightened child. I broke that promise when war came to Earth, and I've lived with that failure ever since." "You didn't fail," Kayla said firmly. "Everything you taught me, everything you showed my people about honor and compassion and never giving up, that's what built the rebirth. That's what made it possible for us to become something worth allying with, instead of something that needed to be conquered." Through the Arboretum's transparent walls, they could see the joint fleet forming up for departure. Human dreadnoughts moved alongside Varelian crystal ships, their different designs somehow complementing each other perfectly. Fighter squadrons practiced integrated maneuvers that combined human precision with Varelian adaptability. The promise I made to you wasn't just about returning, Elias realized. It was about never abandoning the people who trusted me. Today, that includes both our species. Kayla smiled, the same expression of hope and determination he remembered from a terrified child in a cave. "Then let's go keep that promise," she said. Together, they walked toward the command center where two civilizations would face their greatest test, united by the simple human principle that had started it all. When someone needs help, you help them, regardless of where they come from or what they can offer in return. The stars waited, full of challenges and possibilities that neither species could face alone, but both might overcome together. The end.